And that is the most I've clapped all evening. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my Stager YouTube channel. If you are meeting me for the first time, hello! My name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre, and this is my Stager YouTube channel where I review the shows that I have been invited to go and see as an independent theatre critic based here in the UK. I have also been known to talk about news and drama and gossip happening in the theatre industry worldwide. If those sound like the kind of videos that you could vibe with here on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed. Now tonight, I was invited by the lovely team at the new Wimbledon Theatre to go and see the touring production of Strictly Ballroom. This is the new UK tour of the show, based on the beloved Baz Luhrmann Australian film. And this production is being helmed by Strictly Come Dancing judge Craig Revel-Horwood and stars two alumni of the programme, former Strictly Come Dancing UK professional dancer Kevin Clifton and former celebrity competitor and runner-up, I believe, Maisie Smith. Now, Strictly Ballroom as a stage production has had a complicated past. There was a production originally in Australia that was reasonably faithful to the film. It was then brought over here and premiered regionally in the UK. By the time it made it to the West End, it had been heavily adapted, and the original songs written for that stage version were cut. It was brought to town as a jukebox musical, and they introduced a new character to the show who sang all of the songs, so that the characters in the story did not really sing at all. This new version of the tour harkens back more towards that original production and moves away from a lot of what Drew McConey's West End production changed about the show. And it is also my first time seeing this production, and so I was optimistic as a big fan of the film, as someone who grew up with my parents watching it and quoting it constantly. Shame on you, Miss Leachman. Scott Hastings and partner. Honestly, I can't remember how I started this sentence, but I was really optimistic that I was going to like this version of the show, if it was going to be a more faithful adaptation. And I had a lot of trust in this cast and this creative team. I thought it was a great way of marrying a really popular, viable, commercial cast and creative team for the show to one that would also really deliver as well. And yet, here we are. You have seen the thumbnail of this video, you have seen the title of this video, and you can also see my face right now. So we have so much to unpack and so much to discuss about the evening I have just had at Strictly Ballroom. But before I get into my full review, a couple of things I want to remind you of. So, like I said, make sure you're subscribed to my Stager YouTube channel. I make content like this all the time. If you really enjoy today's video, you can use the super thanks button down below to give me a cash tip for this video. That really helps me as a content creator to make more of these videos as regularly as you like to watch them. Also, make sure that you are following me on other social media platforms. I'm at Mickey Joe Theatre on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Now, let's talk about Strictly Ballroom. So I will start by saying that the film is admittedly a little bit unusual. It has this very particular offbeat Baz Luhrmann comedic style, which I enjoy very much. But unless you can really closely translate it, it's like any particularly niche comedic tone. Unless you can replicate it, it's not necessarily going to play well. It's like Mel Brooks has a very particular timing and a very particular delivery and a very particular style. John Waters is another filmmaker who has that very recognizable tone, and you hear that lingering still in the dialogue of the musical Hairspray. Baz Luhrmann has this incredibly distinctive, quirky, offbeat comedic tone that is difficult to replicate, and if you can't replicate it, what happens is these jokes end up falling a little bit flat. But you have to understand with Strictly Ballroom where the sincerity comes into it and where the camp ridiculousness comes into it, because there is plenty of both in this film. Because there is genuine sincerity and romance and warmth and all of these things alongside the high camp drama. And there is room for both of these things, like there is in any musical, but you have to make sure everything is in its correct place. So like I mentioned before, I'm given to understand that this production is more like the original stagings of the show. It really is quite faithful to the film, to the point that we have people coming along at the beginning and giving little monologues, like with the film, as if they are on this documentary style film, even though what we're seeing is a live action stage show, and that framing device is abandoned fairly early on. We see a lot of similar striking visuals from the film. You have the sort of the Coca-Cola billboard that you would expect that's become this iconic visual associated with the film. You have a lot of similar and recognizable costumes. You have Ken in his white ballroom dancing outfit. You have Scott Hastings' iconic jacket. You have his knee slide in at the end. There's lots of visually recognizable moments. And there is plenty of dance. We begin with a lot of dance, and we have an ensemble that tend to return throughout. You know, they play the other competing dance partners when we have the ballroom dance championship scenes, but they also linger on stage in other moments, and some uses of this are more effective than others. Now, unlike the Western version of the show, our protagonists get to sing. Kevin Clifton sings as Scott Hastings. Maisie Smith perhaps sings the most as Fran. There is not a wealth of songs. The few original songs that aren't the ones that you would remember from the film soundtrack that are included, don't worry, but the few original songs that there are reprised a handful of times, so it doesn't feel like there's more than maybe 5 original songs in this show. I'm sure there are more, but it felt as though there weren't. But you do also, of course, have Time After Time, you have Love Is in the Air, you have Perhaps, 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 sung in Spanish. But for lovers of the film, everything you would expect to be in this version of Strictly Ballroom is there. And for lovers of Strictly Come Dancing, there is plenty of dance content. Kevin gets to dance, Maisie gets to dance, and it's crowd-pleasing in that way. It ticks a lot of the boxes of what people will be attending this show for. It can make you laugh. There are lots of flashy moments. There's a plot that runs, meanders sort of haphazardly throughout the show. There is singing, there is dancing, there are moments that are all very visually impressive. A lot of people will walk away from this show thinking, great, fantastic. I struggled with this for a multitude of reasons that I am just going to lay out on the table. If this was a dance on Strictly Come Dancing, then Craig Revel Horwood would have a great many things to say about it. It doesn't make him particularly harsh, it makes him honest, and people value his criticism for that reason. If you're watching this as someone who really enjoyed Strictly Ballroom on stage, that's fantastic. I'm very pleased for you. Theatre is incredibly subjective. More so than anything else, I am pleased that you had a great night at the theatre. However, I do feel particularly responsible for reviewing this honestly. First of all, honesty and authenticity is all I know how to do on YouTube because I am so busy and I see shows all the time. I don't have time to make up opinions about things. All I can do is tell you what I actually thought. And second of all, from what I can tell, this show has not yet been reviewed by any of the major national press. It has been reviewed by BroadwayWorld.com, but beyond that, I'm not sure that they've actually invited the national press to come and review this tour. Make of that what you will, unless a national press night is pending, but in all of the big places, I have not seen reviews for Strictly Ballroom, so I do think it's important to talk about it on behalf of people who may be potentially buying tickets and would like to hear some opinions from theatre critics about the show first. So, bearing that in mind, I'm going to give you my star rating in the next section. Drum roll, please. So after some careful consideration, this was a 2-star show for me. It just had far too many problems and far too many issues. And the night did not get off to a great start, I will acknowledge that. And admittedly, this is its first night in a new touring venue. So for technical things like positioning lights and managing sound when you haven't had an audience in yet, a lot of that can be very challenging. However, this was not its first touring venue. This was something like its 5th venue on the tour that began at the end of September. So while I can be understanding to a certain extent, that Monday night audience is still paying the same as that Tuesday night audience, and they still deserve a professionally put together show, and that's not what we got consistently. The show went up 15 minutes late, whether that was because of tech issues that were lingering, we did have the safety curtain in at the beginning of the show, which is unusual, or whether it was because of the lengthy arrival of a bunch of Strictly Come Dancing professional dancers, who's to say? I will say that lighting cues seem to just be a little bit all over the place for the duration of the show. Even in the final bows moment, there was a spotlight that managed to only hit Maisie and excluded Kevin completely. That felt just like the cherry on top of an evening of technical confusion. There were various points throughout the show where people had lines and they didn't seem to be getting picked up by the lights at those moments. There were also some other moments where, and I haven't seen the show before prior to tonight, but I would have put money on the fact that they were running a simplified lighting plot just to make sure that everyone was lit in some capacity. Where's my phone? I wrote more notes of issues that I had. Which is saying something, because if you don't know, I do not write notes as a critic, but I had just so many thoughts of things that I absolutely needed to say. Here we go. So, tonally, I did think the whole thing was a little bit confused. I think the audience didn't seem to know for the longest time when to clap, when to laugh. There were comedy moments that we weren't sure if we were meant to be taking seriously. There were serious moments in the second act that I was laughing at because it can only be such a serious moment between two friends on stage when you keep using the phrase bogo pogo. Oh, my Australian accent didn't know how to say that one. Bogo pogo? Bo. But I was very much tittering and wanting to laugh, and nobody else in the stalls around me seemed to understand that that was hilarious in the way that I did. Probably because it wasn't supposed to be. But I do think we didn't quite hit that Baz Luhrmann absurdist Australian comedy style. We hit the Australian accents really hard. What we didn't get is the specific comedy timing that would make those jokes funny. I do also think that some of the dialogue moves at such a frenzied rate, and we move through some of the plots so fast. Like you have Scott's dance partner Liz yelling at him and saying, "I just wish that this would happen right now," and then it immediately happens. And then someone says, "That was unexpected," and then goes off, and then we have a flashback showing why that happens. And again, a very faithful recreation of the film, like beat for beat. But then we go into songs that lyrically move at such a slow pace, or take 4 minutes to articulate the same one idea over and over and over. Mostly that was Barry Fife's numbers, if I'm being completely honest. There was reasonably little laughter throughout. There were no moments where it felt like the entire audience were all laughing simultaneously. There were a great many points where we had crossed the line of good taste. There's a whole sequence with Barry Fife where he's having an orgy, where there is someone under the covers doing something while he is on the phone and he is reacting to that. That joke is apparently so great that they play it out twice, and the second time it's a man who comes out of the covers to make it a gay punchline, which, you know, we love. That makes complete sense for a character who moments later uses a gay slur. I had huge issues with the sound. The lyrics I could hear were occasionally dreadful. The opening number for the second act is particularly difficult to get through. And the whole thing just felt messy and clumsy. There were wardrobe malfunctions and there were technical issues. It didn't help the audience to feel particularly comfortable, and I feel like we never really got into the groove of the show. It felt as though we'd really landed somewhere comfortable in the last scene of the first act, where Scott goes with Fran to her family home, and they are taught by Fran's father and extended family and relatives and friends and community how to dance the Paso Doble in an authentic Latin way. But everything prior to that felt like build-up to a moment where the show can actually begin, and then the second act happens and we never quite capture that magic again. So I do think that a lot of the direction is at fault here. Just visually, the staging is very messy and very crowded and very claustrophobic. You have this set that is not dissimilar to the set of Unfortunate, the untold story of Ursula the Sea Witch, where you have these curved structures around the outside that are meant to look like dance rehearsal room flooring that extend up around like clawed fingernails with lights at the top and feathers in this kind of like nightmarish explosion of ballroom dance culture. And I get that as a vibe and an aesthetic. I do. I just wish that they would move back when you have the ballroom dance championship sequences, because they were far too crowded in the middle area. And you got that bit at the beginning where Scott and his partner Liz had to get boxed into one corner, and I get that. I get the chaos of it all in this really tight space, but for various moments, especially the end sequence, you need way more space. You need a blank stage, and it's just the audience watching this dance on a blank stage with a dramatic change in lighting, with flood lighting and spot lighting. and you need space, and you need silence, and you need that to be a moment, and we never got that. The whole ending sequence, if you've seen the ending of Strictly Ballroom, it's not nearly as thrilling on stage. It doesn't have nearly the same impact, because when they restart the dance, they have all of these people standing around them and clapping, and it doesn't feel like it's them against the world, which is what it needs to feel like. There's no tension in that moment, and there's no suspense, because there are no stakes, because everybody's already on their side. Several of the most important moments of the show were physically upstaged, by which I mean they were at the back of the stage and something was blocking them in front. We lost a lot of them to underscoring, making them difficult to follow. You have to work really hard as an audience member just to watch and try and find and discern what it is you're meant to be focusing on this stage, because so much is happening. It is busy, it is messy, there is far too much going on. There are some really tender and sweet and vulnerable moments that are played with other people standing up stage, and they really ought not to be. There are moments where I just want Scott to be by himself on stage, and he's not. There's an ensemble there. There's moments where I want him to be on stage alone with Fran and just the two of them dancing, and there's not. There's an ensemble there. Generally, there was not enough dance. There was definitely not enough of the two of them dancing together, because those are the magic parts of this show, and we needed more of that. I do want to talk about the performances. Kevin Clifton, fantastic dancer, a strong performance here. I mean, he only really gets to play indecision and frustration. The few moments where you get to see him falling in love with Fran are great. I really enjoy Maisie as a performer. She keeps up with Kevin in the dance moments. She dances really well. She sings with a really distinctive and interesting and different sounding pop voice. I like that she doesn't have just the same contemporary musical theatre voice that I've heard dozens of times over. However, she does need a little bit more training to solidify how she is producing that sound. She is singing from the throat rather than utilising her diaphragm, and she sounded vocally tired for having done that presumably on previous tour stops. Consequentially, it sounded a little bit fragile and a little bit underpowered. And when she has the big emotional arc of the show, you want her to be able to belt out those ballads. I did feel like the one song that she sang as Fran, that she reprised a bunch of times, always came in the wrong place. She sings a song about seeing herself reflected in his eyes, and that should happen after they've danced together for the first time, after she's spoken to him for the first time, but she sings it just watching on as he breaks up with his then dance partner, Liz. And the lyrics that Fran is singing at that moment feel premature to the relationship that they have in the show. Similarly, she sings it again, seeing him at the competition, having arrived with somebody else, having decided not to dance with her despite their time training together, deciding to dance with Tina Sparkle. And she sings this song, and it still has this optimistic, loving energy. And it feels like she really ought to sing it after they have this nearly kiss moment and he goes back to the studio before he is confronted with Barry Fife with some trickery. That's the moment that she should sing that song before her heart gets broken, because then we'll feel for her even more when we have this dramatic irony situation where we find out as an audience that they're not going to dance together before she does. Now at this performance, Liv Alexander was playing the role of Liz, giving you over the top, giving you camp, giving you facial expressions and full out dancing and kicking herself in the face and throwing herself around in these crazy outfits. I loved everything about her performance. For me, she was the highlight on that stage. I thought she was bonkers and brilliant. She was zany and out there and completely committed in the best possible way. Mark Sangster played Doug Hastings, Scott's father. This is a very quiet role that comes to be very important by the end of the show. If you've seen the film, you know exactly why. And I was disappointed that this was directed to be played for laughs. When we see him dancing by himself in the studio, this should not be a purely comedic moment that the audience is encouraged to laugh at. Similarly, when we see him dancing with Scott's mother in a flashback, that was also played entirely for laughs. They had these comedy wigs on and these comedy outfits. The whole thing was played completely insincerely, and it diminished the power of his then return towards the end of the show. It also undercut the humour of Barry Fife's ridiculous toupee wig. We know from the film Barry Fife has this ridiculous Donald Trump-esque toupee, but when all of the wigs look a little bit cheap and silly, particularly the throwback to the past wigs, and he then gets given one to put on top of his wig, which is literally a hat on a hat, then we are losing that joke, and then I worry that the rest of the audience don't grasp that that's meant to be a terrible looking toupee, and they think that that's just a legitimate attempt at a good wig from this production, which is not what it's meant to be. Gary Davis played Barry Fife. He was particularly one note in his characterization. He doesn't have an awful lot of light and shade that he could bring to it, but I thought there were moments that he could have been slightly more distinctive in the role. I liked when he got particularly flustered towards the very end, when he's doing his Scott Hastings and partner, please leave the floor. But even then, I could have had more from him. I could have had spitting out those words with venom and disgust. Jose Agudo played Rico, Fran's father. Now, he did a fantastic job. I got everything I needed to from his character. He doesn't have that many moments in the show, but he grabbed every single one he had by the horns, which is an unintentional Spanish reference. His dancing was captivating and theatrical and masculine and tongue-in-cheek, because the whole time he is making fun of Scott Hastings, aka Kevin Clifton. And that was also the best moment of the show, which I'm going to talk about next. So this was a highlight for me when we go and we see Fran's family towards the end of the first act and we get this authentic paso doble moment. It was electrifying and it was so unlike anything that had come before it in the show. The other moment that I thought was particularly great was the whole build up to Time After Time happening for the first time in the show. It gets foreshadowed and foreshadowed and foreshadowed, and they take their time with this learning to dance sequence that Scott and Fran have. They don't rush into that moment, and I appreciate that, because a lot of the big moments we've seen in other film to stage adaptations, they just run right into them at speed, and I like that they really took the time to build into it, because this is the defining moment of the show, these two dancing together for the first time. I do think that the end could have been a lot more powerful. I think we lost a little something in that. I mean, there are staging things that came across very juvenile. You have Scott's father walking through the auditorium and doing the slow clap moment, and then you have the abuela character walking over to Scott in the middle of the dance floor and saying those lines that she says to him in the film, and then just sort of awkwardly sidling off. That to me just felt like the most obvious way of staging that moment. And it's an important moment and it's a meaningful moment, but you could have her upstage of everyone else, lifted up on something, on some piece of staging, lit in a different colour, shouting across to him, and he facing out to the audience, hears her, and that inspires him to carry on dancing. You don't have to have her physically walking over to him, tapping him on the shoulder and saying, by the way, remember this, then awkwardly sidling off. It's just incredibly juvenile staging. It was giving me GCSE drama performance, which is not what I expected at this professional production. And it's a shame, because I think a lot of those dance sequences and those competition sequences could have been defining standout moments of the show. I just think they needed more space. They needed more separation from the studio scenes. They needed that staging to move back. They needed all the scenery to go away. And they needed a full stage and dramatic lighting and to just be played on that stage. So there has to be a purpose to all of these criticisms, and there has to be something constructive I can say about how this show can be improved. I do think finding that correct comedic tone that the script is echoing from the film, I do think that would be really important for this show. This audience needs to know when to laugh, when to applaud. Just from a musical perspective, looking at some of those numbers and giving them a clearer button in choreography, in instrumentation, in arrangement, so that the audience knows this is our cue to applaud. That would help hugely. There are staging parts that can be fixed. If there is any way of moving some of those set pieces back just to give a little bit more space, I think that that would do wonders, or just do away with them completely during the ballroom dance numbers. I think they are completely in the way. I don't have an issue with any of the performances per se, but I do think there are sincere parts of this show that ought to be afforded a little bit more sincerity. Now, all all of this being said, I do think that there is lots to enjoy about this show. If you're a Strictly Come Dancing fan, you get a lot of dance happening on stage. This is a Craig Revel Horwood production. Of course you do. There is plenty of dance content. Kevin dances a lot. Maisie dances a lot. They both impress hugely with their dancing. So if that is why you're going to see this show, if you are fans of the film, it ticks off all of those film moments. They keep in some of my favourite lines from the film, some of my parents' favourite lines from the film, so I think there is plenty to enjoy from that perspective as well. If you like shows like Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and kind of quirky, offbeat Australian comedic things, you will have lots to enjoy about this. If you like lavish, beautiful dance productions, then you will have lots to enjoy about this as well. But those have been my thoughts about Strictly Ballroom on tour. If you have seen this production already on one of its previous tour stops, let us know what you thought down in the comments section. I'm particularly keen to hear from anyone who loved this show and wants to advocate for it. Or if you agreed with me and you had some issues with it, let me know if there's anything I didn't pick up on. There are so many more things that I could talk about, but my mind is still kind of boggled right now after the experience that I've had this evening, I'll be completely honest. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my Stagey YouTube channel for plenty more videos, including more reviews coming very soon. Also, if you really enjoyed, remember you can use the super thanks button down below to give me a tip. Very much helps me to make regular content as a Stagey content creator. Or you can go to patreon.com/MickeyJoeTheatre, where you can also gain access to some exclusive photos and videos. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!